Marcus sat alone on the cracked plastic chair outside the convenience store, his fingers trembling as they wrapped around the warm container of instant noodles. It was the first meal he'd bought in 3 days, scraped together from coins he'd collected by returning bottles and cans he'd found in trash bins across the city. The steam rising from those noodles wasn't just food, it was hope, survival, and the thin thread keeping him connected to his humanity. But in less than 10 minutes, that thread would pull him toward a choice that would change everything he thought he knew about loss, sacrifice, and the mysterious ways the universe keeps score. He had been a different man once. Marcus remembered the weight of his wedding ring, the sound of his daughter's laughter echoing through their suburban home, the confidence of a 6-figure salary in a corner office with windows overlooking the city skyline. That version of Marcus died slowly, first with the cancer diagnosis that took his wife Emma, then with the medical bills that consumed their savings, and finally with the depression that cost him his job, his home, and eventually his will to keep fighting. 6 months of living in his car had weathered his face beyond his 42 years, turning his once sharp eyes hollow and distant. But somewhere beneath the layers of grief and exhaustion, the man Emma had loved still existed, waiting for a reason to emerge. Few believe that kindness can change lives, that second chances exist even in our darkest hours. Please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that miracles still happen. Your support keeps these stories alive. The evening air carried the exhaust fumes and distant sirens that formed the soundtrack of the city's forgotten corners. Marcus had just lifted the first forkful of noodles to his lips when he noticed her. The old woman moved slowly past the store's flickering neon sign, her thin frame swaying with each difficult step. Her clothes hung loose on her body, clean but worn threadbare, and she carried a small canvas bag that seemed almost too heavy for her frail arms. But it was her face that stopped Marcus mid-bite, the same expression of quiet desperation he saw in his own reflection every morning. That particular emptiness that comes from hunger that's gone beyond physical need and become a constant aching companion. She paused near the store's entrance, and Marcus watched as she carefully counted coins in her palm, her lips moving silently. Even from where he sat, he could see her shoulders fall when she realized whatever she had wasn't enough. The store clerk inside was already shaking his head before she even reached the counter. Marcus knew that shake. He'd seen it dozens of times. Not cruel, just indifferent. The automated response of someone who'd learned that compassion doesn't pay the bills. The old woman turned away without argument, without pleading, with the dignified resignation of someone who'd faced this disappointment too many times to waste energy fighting it. Something shifted inside Marcus's chest, a feeling he'd thought had died with Emma. His wife had always said that the measure of a person wasn't found in their wealth or success, but in what they chose to do when they had nothing left to give. He looked down at his noodles, at this pitiful meal he'd worked so hard to earn, and felt the weight of a decision that seemed simultaneously impossible and inevitable. His stomach growled its protest, reminding him he hadn't eaten since finding half a sandwich in a park trash can 2 days ago. Every rational part of his brain screamed at him to eat, to survive, to prioritize his own desperate needs. But Emma's voice echoed in his memory, soft and certain. "We're never so poor that we can't be rich in kindness." Marcus stood up before he could talk himself out of it, his legs unsteady from hunger and something else. Maybe fear, maybe purpose. He approached the old woman as she slowly made her way down the sidewalk, each step looking more difficult than the last. When he called out to her, his voice cracked from disuse and emotion. She turned, her eyes wary. The streets had taught her caution. He held out the container of noodles, and for a moment they just stood there, two souls worn down by life, connected by an offering that meant everything and nothing at all. The confusion in her face gave way to understanding, then to something that looked like pain. She started to refuse, probably seeing in his appearance that he needed it as much as she did, but Marcus pressed it into her hands with a gentleness that surprised them both. The old woman's eyes filled with tears as she accepted the meal, and she reached out with her free hand to touch Marcus's face, her weathered fingers trembling against his cheek. She whispered a thank you that carried the weight of 1,000 prayers, and then she turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner into the gathering darkness. Marcus stood there, his empty hands hanging at his sides, his empty stomach twisting with hunger, and felt something he hadn't experienced in months, a strange lightness, as if giving away everything had somehow made him weigh less, freed him from some invisible burden he'd been carrying. He returned to his chair, to the reality of his situation, to another night ahead with nothing to eat. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd just given away his survival to a stranger, and he had no idea how he'd make it through the next few days. But as he sat there in the cooling evening, he felt more present, more alive than he had since Emma's death. Perhaps this was her legacy, this capacity for compassion even in the face of personal devastation. Perhaps this was the last piece of himself he had left that was worth preserving. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Marcus was considering where he might sleep that night when he heard footsteps approaching. He looked up to see the old woman returning, but she wasn't alone. Beside her walked a younger woman, maybe in her mid-30s, dressed in an expensive coat and carrying herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being heard. The old woman pointed at Marcus, saying something he couldn't hear, and the younger woman's face transformed with emotion. They approached him together, and the younger woman knelt down in front of his chair, her eyes searching his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. When she spoke, her voice shook with barely contained emotion. She explained that the old woman was her mother, that she'd been searching for her for 3 weeks after her mother had wandered away from their home during a confused episode related to her advancing dementia. They'd filed police reports, hired private investigators, posted flyers across the city, and prayed desperately for any sign of her. And here she was, found because a stranger with nothing had given her everything. The younger woman's name was Dr. Sarah Chen, and as she spoke, Marcus learned that she ran a foundation dedicated to helping homeless individuals get back on their feet. Medical care, mental health support, job training, housing assistance. It was work she'd started after her father had died homeless, lost to the streets before they could find him. Saving others had become her way of honoring him, of making peace with the guilt of not finding him in time. And now, this man who'd shown her mother such kindness in her moment of vulnerability, who'd sacrificed his own need for someone else's, she wanted to help him. If this story has touched your heart, if you believe in the power of one small act of kindness to change everything, please leave a comment below telling us about a time when someone's compassion made a difference in your life. Hit that like button and share this video with your friends and family. What happened next unfolded like a dream Marcus couldn't quite believe was real. Dr. Chen's foundation placed him in transitional housing that very night. A clean room with a real bed, a bathroom, and a kitchen. She personally connected him with a therapist who specialized in grief and trauma, helping him begin the long journey of processing Emma's death and his own downward spiral. Her foundation's job training program recognized his business background and helped him rebuild his resume, preparing him for interviews with companies that believed in second chances. Within 3 months, Marcus had secured a position as a financial advisor for a nonprofit organization, using his skills to help others while slowly reconstructing his own life. But the transformation went deeper than circumstances. Marcus began volunteering at a soup kitchen every Sunday, often working alongside Dr. Chen and her mother, who'd made a remarkable recovery once back in her daughter's care. The old woman didn't always remember Marcus or that evening outside the convenience store, but sometimes in her clearer moments she would squeeze his hand and smile with recognition, as if her soul remembered even when her mind couldn't. Those moments felt sacred to Marcus, reminders that his choice that night had rippled outward, in ways he could never have imagined. Before we close, please take a moment to comment below with just one word. The first emotion this story made you feel. Your engagement helps these stories reach others who might need to hear them. A year after that evening, Marcus stood at Emma's grave with fresh flowers, telling her about the life he was rebuilding, about the people he was helping, about how her love and lessons had never really left him, even in his darkest moments. He finally understood what she'd always known, that we're never truly empty as long as we can still give, that kindness is the currency that matters most, and that sometimes the universe uses our lowest moments to reveal who we really are. That container of noodles, his last meal given freely to a stranger, had cost him everything and given him back even more, his purpose, his humanity, and the knowledge that Emma's love still moved through him, turning his pain into compassion, his loss into connection, and his surrender into salvation.